Tonight, I want to share with you one of the most shocking cases of two-tier justice I think this country has ever seen. And it's a scenario that, quite frankly, shames our nation. You might have already heard of this lady here. Her name is Lucy Connolly. She received a 2.5-year prison sentence in October for her part, or lack of it, in the Southport riots last year. In the hours after 3 little girls had been slaughtered at a Taylor Swift dance class in Southport, Lucy, who is a mother of one, posted a tweet that called for mass deportations now and allegedly endorsed setting fire to hotels, adding, "If that makes me racist, so be it." After taking the dog for a walk and returning with a clearer mind, Lucy deleted that tweet just 4 hours later. Now, this conversation isn't about trying to defend her tweet, which was very clearly wrong. It's about the disproportionate length of her sentence and now her treatment behind bars. Alison Pearson of the Daily Telegraph has been doing sterling and vital work bringing Lucy's story to light. And much of the detail you're about to hear from me now comes from her very important journalism. So for background, Alison reports that Lucy Connolly has always been easily triggered by the suffering and death of children. She regularly wrote to MPs and newspapers about cases of child neglect or kids being harmed in the news. And crucially, closer to home, Lucy and her husband lost their firstborn child, Harry, who was just 19 months old when he died after devastating failures in NHS care. Little Harry was sent home from hospital after Lucy pled with doctors to put him on a drip, only for his parents to find his lifeless body in his cot at 4 a.m. A coroner found a catalogue of failures at the hospital, but it was ruled not to have committed gross negligence manslaughter as the family wanted. Lucy once said that doctors had got away with killing her son. Their daughter was born 2 years later, and she's now a 12-year-old girl suffering without her mother. But Lucy was diagnosed with PTSD after losing little Harry and, quite frankly, has never really recovered. So that condensed bit of background hopefully gives you some context as to why Lucy Connolly fired off such an angry tweet on that fateful day after hearing about the murder of those 3 Southport babies. And what about Lucy herself? Well, she was a childminder who looked after kids from many different backgrounds and nationalities. Nigerians, Poles, Somalians, Jamaicans, Lithuanians. Lucy even signed migration paperwork as a witness for some of those families, and many of the mums and dads she worked for gave glowing character references to the judge who ultimately sentenced her, making quite clear that she wasn't the racist or the far-right bigot that she was being made out to be. Lucy's lawyer, a young duty solicitor, commissioned a psychiatric report on her, but it was nothing like the quite thorough evaluation she'd had after little Harry's death and her subsequent diagnosis of PTSD. Lucy says the psychiatrist didn't even ask her about Harry in his report for the court. Lucy eventually pleaded guilty to the offence of distributing material with the intention of stirring up racial hatred because she says she believed she'd be home for Christmas, perhaps get away with a short sentence and then an electronic tag on her ankle. Lucy, who suffers from acute anxiety and was on medication for the huge personal trauma she'd suffered after losing Harry, was desperate to see her 12-year-old daughter, her only child. There's so much more to this story that Alison Pearson has reported in the Daily Telegraph that would leave you gobsmacked. For example, Lucy was refused bail despite not being a flight risk. Senior judges on Southport cases were drafted in to hear cases which would normally be dealt with by magistrates who can only give 12-month sentences. And the Crown Prosecution Service, get this, released an incorrect statement saying Lucy told police she didn't like immigrants and wouldn't leave her children with them, only for the CPS to later correct it sometime later. But the damage was done, and it goes on and on. I do urge you to find Alison's work online and comprehensively read it all to get a true flavour of what's happened with Lucy Connolly. The latest shocking development in Lucy's case is that she's been, again, denied release on temporary licence, ROTL as it's known, which allows prisoners up to 2 overnight stays at home each month. Criminals who have committed far worse crimes than Lucy have been allowed to leave to see family members and children. Lucy's applications, meanwhile, have continually been denied by the authorities. Refused time to see her sick husband and 12-year-old daughter. 31 months in prison for a tweet. If Keir Starmer had anything about him, he'd personally intervene now and correct this wrong. But the argument I'm hearing is that he quite frankly has already intervened albeit indirectly from afar, because his rhetoric about Southport offenders being given the full force of the law seems to have had an effect on the judiciary, the probation service and the prison system, because Lucy Connolly is, in my opinion, cruelly being made an example of. Lucy's case is the kind of story you hear about in Russia or North Korea. Her treatment is a national disgrace, a stain on the very fabric of this nation, and it's about time her unfair and cruel treatment came to an end. Well, let's get the reaction now from my panel. Journalist and communications advisor Linda Jubilee, the former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Bleksley, and the former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards. Good evening, panel.
Hello.
Nice to be back after a few weeks off. Hope you missed me.
We did.
You don't have to answer that.
But my aim's getting better.
Who? Say it again, sorry.
But my aim is getting better.
Oh, good. Glad to hear. Linda, let's start with you. When I was away, I stayed out the news cycle intentionally to give my sort of mental clarity a bit of a rest. But this litany of stories from Alison Pearson at the Daily Telegraph about Lucy Connolly really shook me to my core. Is she this woman? Is she a political prisoner? And do you agree with the treatment she suffered?
There is no way she needed or deserved a custodial sentence. That was a completely ridiculous thing to do. And it certainly should have been a mitigating circumstance where the judge was concerned that she had a husband with a serious blood disorder, a 12-year-old child, and she had officially diagnosed PTSD from the death of her first child at only 19 months old. So all those factors should have come into play where the judge made the sentencing order. But frankly, she should be out by now. I mean, maybe what we need to do is make a Netflix programme.
Goodness me.
That might persuade Keir Starmer.
I'm glad I missed all that nonsense.
To the plate.
I caught the tail end of Kemi Badenoch and the BBC Breakfast Show.
That was interesting.
Goodness me, I'm glad I missed that. Paul, what's your take on this? Is her sentence fair? Is the fact she's not allowed home to see her 12-year-old child, her sick husband, is that fair?
Well, first of all, I think Alison Pearson's work is really great journalism. I think that's where, our British journalism just comes into play, and to unveil things like this. I think my gut reaction to start with was you can't go online and say these things without consequences, and you can't distinguish between online and the real world. If you're demanding that people go and burn down hotels, then that is a crime.
Well, to be specific, she said, do that for all I care.
The judge obviously interpreted that as being, a crime had been committed. Yeah. Now, that's all true, but I think what's come to light since does invite further investigation and a sense that there should be some leniency here because of all the reasons you've described and Alison Pearson has revealed. It just seems to be that this now seems disproportionate. And the judge at the time may have taken that decision, but subsequently I think we need to look again at it.
Peter, what's your take?
I echo Linda's words entirely, and I'd just like to rubber stamp your monologue. But there's another issue at play here. Disgustingly, defence solicitors did the government's bidding when so many of these people were being arrested. And I've got first-hand knowledge of this because a friend of mine's son got arrested at the protest in Westminster and he was held in custody, remanded in custody, all the while whilst a duty solicitor who is supposed to represent their client and act in their best interests was persuading this young man to plead guilty. Guilty to an offence which was later slung out at the Inner London Crown Court, and I was there when the judge dismissed it. I wonder how many other people were entirely innocent and yet were coerced, bullied, persuaded to plead guilty by people who call themselves solicitors, legal representatives. Shame on any of those who did Starmer's bidding. It's
such a great point. Lucy mentions it. Her husband talks about it in the Telegraph. She should have pled not guilty and gone to trial because lots of legal experts have told Alison Pearson you would have got off on jury. They would have taken the PTSD into account. They would have taken all the background into account. But she feels like she was bounced into pleading guilty because she thought she'd be home for Christmas.
And there was one quote that stood out for Alison Pearson in the entire interview, and that was Lucy Connolly had to actually pretend to be someone she was not.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with pleading guilty. She took some advice. It was the wrong advice. She should have pled not guilty. But above all of that, she could be let out now. There would be nothing to stop releasing
let's discuss
her
that
now.
Then. Paul, would you call on Keir Starmer to intervene And, he can't intervene in the probation service.
No, I was going to say, we don't have
to make a public statement. Kemi Badenoch has. I think we've got the tweet. Kemi went on Twitter. I think she gave a piece to the Daily Mail saying that it was unjust, it was unfair. Should Keir Starmer do the same? Would you back him to do that?
I don't want the politicisation of the judiciary, and I don't want Prime Ministers determining what's going on.
Keir Starmer already did that.
But I would say that it should be revisited, and I am conceding that ground, because I think the evidence that's come out since does suggest that we should. I would say, though, this is going to be an unpopular view, we had to stamp down on those riots early doors and come down with the full force of the law. Otherwise, they would have spread, and we would have had civil disorder on a much, much bigger scale. And it was shopkeepers and others who were getting their properties damaged and businesses affected badly, and we had to nip it in the bud. We, as a country, had to nip it in the bud. So I'm happy to defend the strong action taken at the time. I think it quelled something much, much worse.
Well, it's about discretion, though, isn't it? Because there are people there who did deserve some sentences, some custodial sentences, but clearly discretion should have been used when sentencing Lucy Connolly. That much is obvious to most people.
And she got bad advice, it would seem. I mean, the solicitor's advice was plainly wrong, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It grieves me to say this, but the way this country is going, the abysmally way that it is being led, and the disquiet that is out there on the streets, I fear we will have huge public disorder again sooner rather than later.
Well, I hope not, because I mean it was a horrible time for the country. It was violent. It wasn't British. Let's be clear about that. But Paul, your point about clamping down on stifling the riots. Lucy Connolly wasn't anywhere near the riots. She fired off some angry tweet online, went for a dog walk, came home, cleared her head, and then deleted it. And she's been treated the same as thugs, and there were some thugs involved, lobbing Molotovs into asylum homes.
It was only up for 4 hours, that tweet.
But, Ben, you said yourself in your monologue that you're not going to defend the tweet.
No, the tweet was wrong.
Yeah, it was criminally wrong. It was a criminal offence. You can't go online and say, let's burn down hotels.
The sentence was utterly disproportionate.
It's disproportionate.
That's right.
The tweet was wrong, but what's also wrong is considering that tweet the same as someone who lobs a Molotov into an asylum hotel. It's not the same thing.
It's not, but
There's
the internet is not an ungoverned space where you can do and say whatever you like. You can't go on there and defame people or incite violence or commit crime online. We've got to get over this idea that somehow this is a safe space where you can do all these things.
Okay. All right. Great start. Thank you, panel. Good to be back. Time now.